Well, longtime Trump supporter John McCain has some surprising advice for the new administration, and actually this time I think he may actually have a point. Hi everybody, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is The Right Angle on the call for a foreign policy that's actually based on some kind of morality. Senator John McCain wrote an open letter basically to Rex Tillerson and the Trump administration, essentially saying this idea of realpolitik, the idea that we're going to do what's in our best interest and we're going to make the deals we need to make with the people no matter what they are. He said that this is a terrible thing for America. He reminded us about his time in a prison camp and his belief in the rightness of the American cause. He talked about the many times that people in the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain, heard Ronald Reagan saying that this is an evil empire and the wall must come down, and the encouragement it gave them. And McCain is arguing here that American foreign policy needs to be based on some kind of a morality, that it's not just another country with just another foreign power. I happen to agree with this. The problem is, I think, is that our credibility is so unbelievably damaged in the last 8 years, and earlier, but especially the last 8 years. How do you now convince the world that we actually represent something when we made so many retreats? So, Steve, let's start with you. In Vietnam, we had people who were on the side of America, and they risked their lives to either inform for America, fight for America, do whatever they needed to in America, and we promised them our support. And after the war was over, 2-3 years later, the Democrats voted to pull all funding out of Vietnam, and the people who trusted us with their lives were either re-educated, killed, or drowned at sea in one of these boats. 7 million, something like that. In Iraq, we went into Iraq, and with the surge, and basically the idea of the surge is we're going to bring in enough troops now to protect you. If you work with us, we'll protect you from these murderers and these terrorists, which you don't like and we don't like and everything is. And once again, after that was secured and basically starting to work, the Democrats decided to pull out and let those people hang in there and so on. So how do we overcome this credibility gap if we're going to start talking about the idea of us representing anything?
Well, American foreign policy is probably unique because it has to be might and right. But it's more complicated than even that. You look at the two most successful foreign policy presidents in my lifetime. That would be Richard Nixon. I'm not a fan of Richard Nixon. He was hounded from office, and deservedly so. But his foreign policy was a success. He got us out of Vietnam with our honor as intact it was going to be, given the domestic situation. He stood by South Vietnam until he was out of office, and Congress ended that. He made deals though with the Chinese to pull them away from the Soviet bloc, and reordered the place that the United States, the disastrous place the United States was in when he was sworn into office in January of 1969. He did some maybe some things that were morally ambiguous, but they were also necessary and helped to reestablish America's strength and prestige in a world where both were in very, very bad shape. The America that Ronald Reagan inherited was in a stronger condition despite 4 years of Jimmy Carter, but he took the moral stand that his short-form foreign policy with regards to the Soviet Union was, we win, they lose. And for him, that was a moral stance. Communism belonged in the dustbin of history because it was evil. And you know what? When he called it an evil empire, this came out shortly after the end of the Cold War. Actually, the Cold War didn't end. We won the Cold War. Shortly after we won the Cold War, there was a Soviet general whose name I wish I knew, but he was quoted as having tears in his eyes saying, we heard Reagan give that speech, and we knew it was evil. We knew it. This is a Soviet general talking. So these two men with very successful foreign policies came at it from very different places. But I maintain that depending on the situation, you absolutely have both. Look, this is the last best hope of mankind on the planet. I believe that. This country stands for and protects freedom. It protects trade. These are important, vital things to humanity. And these are the things we need to promote around the world. But remember, Nixon got us out of a war. Reagan only authorized the use of force 3 times, and each time was only very, very brief. So being strong in the world doesn't necessarily mean going to war, and John McCain would just bomb the crap out of everybody. So listen to McCain, but don't do what he says.
If a Soviet general can cry because an American president identified his country as what it is,
Yeah.
that's pretty remarkable, and it tells you what the common people were thinking. And as all of these people under the boot of communism were crying with relief that Reagan had called them an evil empire, the Democrats in this country and the liberals were absolutely outraged, on fire, sure it was the end of the world. How could we possibly say something that cruel? And it's probably the Russian missiles are on the way. Scotty, if you agree with McCain's point about having a moral core to American foreign policy, if you agree with that, what should that core be, do you think?
This is a challenging question because I believe that war is fundamentally a moral question. And if you try to reduce that question to an economic one, to an opportunistic realpolitik question of, well, does it suit our needs to keep the oil flowing, for example, in some area of the world, then I think you're actually doing something that may be more immoral than anything you might do in war, because you're using it instrumentally. You're using it as a tool to achieve your ends, rather than as the thing that you go to most reluctantly because there is some great evil happening. And I think the areas where we've gotten into trouble over the years is not necessarily in the deployment of troops to defend people who were oppressed or being slaughtered. The problem came in that we were unwilling to make the tough call. In the case of Vietnam, for example, I mean, read H.R. McMaster's book, Dereliction of Duty, and see what McNamara and Johnson did to screw up that war. They basically said, let's keep killing some Viet Cong and we're going to bring them to the bargaining table, when the war would have been cut short by years if they had just had the moral courage to go in there and say, no, what we're going to do is utterly destroy you. And
Clayton Abrams had a plan for that too.
That's right. So, and I think that comes with a problem, because if you're going to engage in war, the moral thing to do, the right thing to do, is engage in total war to end it rapidly, instead of what we've done over the years. So, and I think McCain makes an excellent point. And I'm not going to go into, McCain himself as a politician. I have great admiration for him as a guy who survived, 7 years in a POW camp. And anybody who gets through that has a backbone, something that I can only aspire to. But that doesn't mean I agree with him on political issues. However, I think this is a salutary corrective that he's issuing here that basically says, look, be afraid of the guy who says, you know what, the guy's a dictator. He's an SOB, but he's our SOB.
Yeah. There has been so much erosion of the American ideal, but let's just start with the basics. The fundamental basic of a country's diplomacy should be consistency, regardless of what the actual strategy is or whatever the national interests are. Consistency is what you want. Consistency allows you to make deals with allies and allows you to form alliances against enemies. You have to be consistent. You can't change your allies every 4 years. Likewise, you can't abandon them every 4 years. Soon, nobody's going to trust you, and I don't blame them for not trusting you. Yeah. At the beginning of the Iraq War, and in fact, all through the Iraq War, up until Barack Obama's presidency, I was in favor of this democracy idea. I was in favor of this nation building. And then I changed my mind. And I didn't change my mind because we couldn't do it. I changed my mind because we obviously did do it. What changed my mind was the ability to go in there and do these things in Vietnam and in Iraq at a very high cost, nevertheless seemed to have provided democratic, stable governments in areas where we needed them. What I had not counted on was the idea that an American Congress, an American president, would simply create defeat out of the jaws of victory simply because that's what they ran on. That was just off of my radar. So now I don't know. I wouldn't do it now. I wouldn't do it not because it couldn't be done. I wouldn't do it not because it was the right thing. I wouldn't do it because it would be undone if it were successful. So where does that leave us? I think it's pretty simple for me. If I was president and I was formulating a foreign policy that would stick through the ages, I would simply say this. This country represents freedom. People who are fighting for freedom are our friends. People who are oppressing people are our enemies. The people who we have alliances with are basically people who understand the value of freedom. Britain, France, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, all those. And then I would say the question is, at what level do we get involved in this fight for freedom? There are certainly going to be some areas where our national interest is going to be at stake. And in cases where our national security is at stake and our national security only, then I would be willing to intervene on the side of freedom. So what about the huge majority of cases where it's not in our national interest? Then I would do the fight for freedom the way that Ronald Reagan did it. And of all the things I've seen since I've been alive, and certainly since I was politically aware, the most horrible missed opportunity was in 2009 when the Iranian people were in the streets against this lunatic regime that has punished them and tortured them for 3 generations now, made them a pariah nation, made them a nation of outcasts. They're working on nuclear weapons. They supply virtually all of the terrorism in the world comes from this regime. And in 2009, it wasn't like we had to go over there and put boots on the ground, and we didn't have to go over there and bomb things. We didn't have to do anything. The President of the United States had to come out and say, we are 100% supporting the people of this revolution, and we will do everything in our power to make sure that freedom and democracy returns to Iran. If Barack Obama had done that, they would have succeeded, but he didn't. He kept his mouth shut because he's on their side. He's handing them crates full of money, and he's on their side. So I'd be about freedom, and I'd be about promoting freedom everywhere, whether that means Voice of America, whether it means the Marine Corps, whether it means the Air Force. But I've learned some lessons about this. I've learned the lessons of the absolute base, power-hungry party that simply is willing to kill thousands, if not millions of people and throw away victories that cost us thousands of the best lives we have simply for their political gain. I don't trust this country as long as there's a Democratic Party to make any deals or make any promises. I'm sorry. Until that party becomes a party of patriotism with a different way to get there, no. If I was looking at the United States as an ally, I'd give it very serious thought if I were you. It pains me to say it more than you have any idea, but that's the reality of the world today. So yes, I think he's right. We do need to have a moral foreign policy, and at the same time, if you're thinking about forming an alliance with America, because Donald Trump makes promises, I suspect he'll keep his promises, but I'm not entirely sure that Elizabeth Warren will keep them if she's elected president. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. For everybody here at Right Angle, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks again for our members that make all of this possible.